Hello, hello. How is everybody today? Good morning. Surprise, it's me. Um, my name is Philip Brand, and I have found a time machine over Thanksgiving, set me back 30 years. No, I'm just kidding. My name is Grayson. I actually did that in the first service, and somebody told me afterwards, you never introduced yourself after you introduced yourself as Philip Brand. So the first service, if they were visiting, they have no idea who I am. They think my name is Philip Brand. Um, but is anybody still full from Thanksgiving? Yeah, people still full. Um, we did Thanksgiving lunch, and that's nothing out of the ordinary. We usually do that, but I usually eat a large amount at Thanksgiving lunch. Look, Thanksgiving comes once a day. My belief is indulge when you can, you know, and so I used to just go all out, eat what I can, and then take a nap, and then I'm ready for Thanksgiving again at dinner. That did not happen this year, and I've realized my body, my age, I've finally gotten to the point where that's not going to happen anymore, and it makes me deeply sad inside because I love that food. But something else I did over Thanksgiving besides eat was I caught up on some podcasts. Side note, if you don't know, we do a podcast here. It's called Generations. It's Chad, it's Philip, it's Seth, it's me. We all sit down at a table, and I think it's a fun time. I think it's a good time, and y'all can listen to it. No pressure or anything. It's just me up here on a Sunday morning asking you to listen to our podcast. It's no pressure, but I was listening to this other podcast and I got caught up, and they always begin their podcasts asking would you rather questions. And so I wanted to bring one of them to you guys because I'm just curious where your head's at. And so they started off and they asked, would you rather be stranded for a month in the Florida Everglades, the Amazon rainforest, or the Australian outback? Now, you don't get time, you don't get any supplies. You are taken from where you are right now, and you were dropped in one of those three locations. So I wanted to ask you guys, just by show of hands, which one you would pick to survive in. I understand there is less than a 1% chance, at least for me, there is a less than 1% chance I'm surviving at any of these places. But if you think that if you would pick the Florida Everglades, raise your hand. Okay. What about the Amazon rainforest? Who's picking the Amazon rainforest? Okay. Now, what about the outback, the Australian outback? Oh, goodness. See, in the first service, there was a ton of people that picked outback. And somebody said steak. That's the reason they picked it. And I had to clarify to him. I was like, I said Australian outback, not the American outback. You're not getting a steak. You're not getting shrimp on the bobby or whatever they do. Jane, can you do it? I understand you're British, but shrimp on the bobby? I can't do it. No, can you say shrimp on the can you, shrimp on the bobby? Okay. But it's the Australian outback. You don't get a steak. You don't get a bloomin' onion. There's none of that. And so I would pick, personally, the Everglades because most of you don't know this about me. But before I was saved, when I was in high school, I had two career choices. One of them, I was good at math. I decided to put that talent, that God-given talent, I thought maybe engineering, that was a possibility. The other one, I had no talent for this. I don't know why I chose it. It was just something interesting to me, was an alligator farmer. A lot of you probably didn't know that was even a thing until right now. But it is a thing, alligator farming. It's real. median salaries between 58,000 to 62,000, at least in 2018, okay? So I would pick the Everglades, you know? I had that passion. I wanted to go into alligator farming. Why not? And honestly, if I didn't have that, it would be a real toss-up for me between rainforest and Everglades, because at least in those two places, I know I'm going to be able to find some water. I know I'm going to be able to find water somewhere. I don't have that guarantee in the Outback. In the Outback, you're going around, every single day that you're in the Outback, you are hoping to see a cactus. You are hoping to see a cactus so that you can get some cactus salad for dinner and some cactus water for your drinking. And somebody mentioned to me after the first service, Australia is a death trap. Australia is a death trap, and everything is below the sand. You have those snakes, you have nowhere else to sleep but the sand, just so y'all know. So everything under the sand, that's coming up to kill you when you go to sleep. I'm just letting y'all know. You guys that picked Outback, I'm just letting y'all know. But that's the least likely place I would pick. There's no way. I'm surviving for maybe a week in the rainforest, maybe a week in the Everglades. Outback, I'm lasting 2-3 days max. I'm not surviving there at all. But that's just for a month. Like, I am just asking you for a month. Imagine I asked you to get up where you were right now, not take anything with you, no prep time, and I ask you to wander around for a year. Or maybe it's year, and then it's another year, and then it's year after year after year after year of wandering around. See, the Israelites, after the Exodus, that's exactly what happened. They were in Egypt, and then they were taken out, and they were led into this wilderness, and year after year after year, they were just wandering. So we're going to look at a passage from this time period, from when they're wandering around in the wilderness. If you could turn in your Bibles to Numbers chapter 20. Numbers chapter 20. I am really surprised that none of y'all said steak, by the way, second service. I'm very surprised. Smarter, yeah. Seth wasn't here the first service. He's here this service. I told him about this introduction, and he immediately went, steak. So, Numbers chapter 20. And it begins like this. And the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month. And the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give water to the congregation and their cattle." And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them." These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy. We're going to stop there. Oftentimes, we look at narrative accounts like this in the Bible, and we tend to focus on the main person, the main human of the story. And so that would be Moses. We tend to look at what he does, and we see what he does right, what he does wrong, and we try to learn from that. We're trying to see what we would do different, what we would do the same. It's typically how we read these. But I actually want to spend some time, we get to Moses, we'll get to Moses, but I want to spend some time looking at the Israelites, looking at the people. Because it's not the outback, per se, but the wilderness that they were in was very similar to the outback. It was very desolate. It was very vast. It was very dry and hot. They didn't have a ton of water in the wilderness. They were hoping for water every single day. And so when these people, when they come up to Moses, it's not a, Moses, I'm thirsty. Moses, my mouth is dry. I want some water. Moses, where my water bottle at? It wasn't none of that. They weren't being like that. It was Moses. We need some water, or us, our children, our livestock, we're all going to die. In the outback, not the steakhouse, by the way, in the outback, the number one cause of death, the reason people don't make it out of the outback is dehydration. That is the number one reason. It's not what I would have thought. I would have assumed heat. I would have assumed starvation. I figured somewhere along the line there's got to be a cactus. But the number one cause is dehydration. So in an environment very similar to that, we can think along the same lines. That they are thirsting to death in this scenario. Now, I don't think that their intent for requesting water was wrong. I don't think that. If you're dying, you're going to need some water. Go talk to Moses. Go ask for water. I think where they went wrong was the way in which they asked and the timing with which they asked. Now, the way in which they asked, we can all agree, these are an ungrateful people, an ungrateful and unfaithful people. These people, they say, would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. What that is that's a reference to a few chapters back. The earth swallowed up some Israelites who rebelled against Moses, who rebelled against his authority. And so what they're saying is I wish we got swallowed up by the earth. Now, I don't know about you guys, but what I don't want to see on my tombstone is Grayson swallowed by the earth. That's not a fortunate fate to me. You know, that's not a way to go out. I think that there are ways to go out, and that's not one of them to me. Nobody wants to get swallowed up by the earth. But they're sitting there complaining and complaining. They're saying, if only we died, if only we got swallowed by the earth. And then they point the blame to Moses. They say, you let us out here. You brought us out here. We were in Egypt. We had water. We had food. They were feeding us. We weren't thirsty. We weren't thirsting to death in Egypt. They said, Moses, you let us out here. You followed God's direction. You let us out here. And the whole time that I'm reading this, I'm sitting there, and I'm just imagining God saying, yes, I directed Moses to lead you out there. But you know what slavery was? You were in shackles. You were in chains. You were being physically broken by the Egyptians. Yes, you were fed. You had water. But you had no freedom. You had nothing. You were working, and they didn't care if you fell over. God said, I'm caring for you. I want your freedom. You are my people. They were ungrateful. They were unfaithful. See, God, He had supplied. This isn't the first time that they had complained in the wilderness. They had complained many times before. And every time that they complained, God dealt with it. If they needed food, he supplied the manna, he supplied the quail, he supplied whatever they needed. So in this, they've turned their back to God, and they're sitting there and they're pointing the blame at Moses. And it's not just the way that they did it, it's the timing that they had when they did it. Back in verse 1, it says, the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now, we don't often read that with a lot of emotion. We don't often read that feeling the emotion of that sentence. And honestly, I think Moses did that to point out that the older generation is dying and the new generation is coming. I think that's the purpose behind why Moses did it. But I think there's a secondary reason why that's in there. And I think this is really the Spirit's work. We see from this that Moses is grieving. He is mourning. If you don't know who Miriam is Moses' sister. The person who, in the early chapters of Exodus, who put Moses in the basket and sent him down the river, that's Miriam. The person who came up to Pharaoh's daughter and had the courage to say, should I go get a Hebrew woman to nurse this baby for you? That's Miriam. Miriam was a leader of the Israelite women. This is somebody that Moses loved. He trusted. In her death, that's going to cause him to mourn. It's going to cause him to grieve. But not only that, he's lost a leader. He has more burdens, more stresses, more responsibilities now. This is a broken human being at this point. Moses, he is broken by this death. And they come up to him, and they sit there and they blame him. They say, you did this, Moses. We know Miriam died. You did this, Moses. Nobody came up to him and said, Moses, we know Miriam died. We loved her too. We're deeply sorry for your loss. And we will give you time to mourn this. We will give you time to grieve this. But we're dying of thirst. We need some water. Can you please talk to God? We'll pick up the slack after we get water, after we get food. We'll pick it up, and we'll give you time to grieve. But right now we need water. Can you please talk to God? Nobody came up to him and did that. Nobody came up to him and talked to him that way. They sat there and they blamed him. They didn't care what emotions he was feeling. They didn't care what he was thinking in that moment. They didn't care the way that his soul hurt. And I was reading this and I got to thinking, how often do we as Christians do this? How often do we as Christians just view people as an object, as a way to get what we want? And I think it's a lot more often than we're willing to admit, honestly. I think whenever we go out to eat, and whether you have a waitress or a waiter, you start viewing them as just a person, just an extension of their job, right? You don't view them as a fellow human being in that moment, a fellow person who bears the image of God, as someone who is loved and cherished by God. We just view them as an extension of their job. So when we go out to a restaurant and we get something to eat, we just start looking them as like a food delivery person, someone who's delivering our food. What we don't care about is that fight that they had with their boyfriend or their girlfriend before their shift and the hurt that they're feeling from that. We don't care about the fact that they're trying to make ends meet. They're trying to pay rent. They're trying to get money to pay mortgage. And they're stressed out. They're burdened. Rent is coming up. Rent's due. And they don't have enough. That's not something we care about because we just view them as an extension of their job, as an object, a way to get what we want. Or maybe it's, I learned this in the first service. Somebody told me it's a CPA, the person that does your taxes. Maybe you view that person as just the person for your taxes. You don't care about the fact that they recently went through a divorce and they're hurt. They're trying to see their kids on the weekends, and they have that pain, they have that struggle inside of them. Just view them as a tax person. It's hard because when that happens, it means we're just viewing them as a shell. We're going to get a little philosophical for a second. Have any of you ever just stared into a mirror at yourself? Maybe not stared, maybe like a prolonged look. Have you ever just looked in the mirror into your own eyes? It's a weird feeling. It's a weird feeling because, you know, when you are inside yourself, you don't often see your face, right? You don't really see any of this. So you look into a mirror and you start looking into your eyes and you start thinking, my thoughts are in that. My soul is in that. My emotions, everything that's housed in here, everything that I feel, that I think, everything's in there. And so whenever that happens, I think it's easier to see how we were uniquely formed by a creator, God. Whenever that happens, whenever you start looking in the mirror and you see yourself that way, and you start thinking about it, and the Spirit starts tugging on your heart, I think it's easier to see that you were formed by a creator, God. But I think it's a whole lot more difficult to see other people this way. Because you don't know their thoughts. You can't feel the way that they're feeling, their emotions, their burdens, their stresses. And if you don't take the time and you don't care, then you're just going to view them as that shell. You look into a mirror, you see your shell. And you're thinking, I'm housed in this flesh, in this bone. Everything that I have, it's in this. But when we view other people, we don't know their thoughts. We don't know the way they're feeling. We just see their shell. And so when that happens, we stop caring for people. We stop loving them. And that's not great. That's not good because they are God's creation just as you and I are God's creation. They are God's valued creation, most prized creation. When He made us, we were set apart. We were very good. When He made everything else, it was good. But it's no human. See, you are valued. You are cared for. You are loved by God. And it's not just you. Those shells that you're seeing, everybody else in this world, they're loved. They're valued by God too. And it's hard for them to see God in us whenever we're just trashing them. See, if I say that I love Van Gogh, right? But then I trash all of his paintings. I hate his paintings. You're going to say that I don't really love Van Gogh. Van Gogh created those paintings. How can you say you love Van Gogh, but you don't love his paintings? How can we say that we love God, but we don't love His most valued creation? How can we say that we love God, but we don't love other people like God loves other people? See, the Israelites, they stopped doing this. They stopped loving Moses like that. They just saw him as an object, a way to get what they wanted. That's how we got to stop viewing people that way. We got to stop viewing people as an object, as a way to get what we want. And we got to love them. We got to care for them, care about their emotions, care about their feelings. Stop viewing them as just a shell, right? We got to stop doing that. So the people, they messed up. But now we're getting to Moses. In verse 6, we're going to go back and we're going to read a little bit. Moses messes up too. He says, But then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you will bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. So Moses messes up too. Moses messes up too. See, this isn't the first time, I mentioned this earlier, this isn't the first time that the people complained either to Moses or against Moses. Since the sea split and they crossed the sea, they started on this journey in the wilderness, they had complained 11, 12 times about Moses or to Moses to this point. But every single one of those, Moses had handled well. Moses has handled well to the point where God said, yeah, you can still go into the promised land. This older generation of Israelites, they're going to die out. You're going to take the new generation in. You're going to lead them in, Moses. But he messed up this time. So what changed? What went different for Moses this time? Why did he mess up this time and not every other time? Why not whenever they made the golden calf and they started worshiping the golden calf and he came down from the mountain? Why wasn't it that time that he messed up? Why was it this time? Was it the grief in the morning for his sister? Was this time the breaking point where he snapped because he was frustrated and he was tired of it? He had the stresses and the burdens all weighing on him, and the frustration was just too much. Now, I think his grief and I think his frustration, I think it played a role. But I think the main reason that Moses messed up, the key reason Moses messed up, I think he lost sight of God as his authority. I think that Moses lost sight of God as his authority. He was no longer wanting to submit to God in that moment. If you notice in verse 6, I did that in the first service too. If you notice in verse 10, he says, "Here now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" That word "we" is something I wish I could blow up in your Bibles. I wish I could make it bigger. I wish that I could highlight it, underline it, whatever. Because that "we" is implying Moses and Aaron. Moses stands up in front of the congregation and he's like, "You don't appreciate me as leader? Fine. Me and Aaron are going to bring water out of this rock." He wanted to prop himself up in this moment. He was not focused on propping God up and giving God the glory. He was focused on giving himself some glory and propping himself up. And that's where he went wrong. Down in verse 12, the Lord talks to Moses and Aaron, and he says, "Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, you shall not bring this assembly into the promised land." That's another one of those words I wish I could blow up. I wish I could make it bigger. God says, because you did not put your trust in me, because you did not give me the glory, because you were focused on yourself in this situation, you're not going to enter the promised land. Moses, he stepped out of the path that God had carved for him. He stepped out of the directions that God had given him, and he went his own way. It reminded me of a story of when I went on vacation. I don't remember what year this was. It's not really important to the story either. It was me and a bunch of my family, and we were traveling. We got to the beach house. When we got to the beach house, plan was unload all the cars, and then we're going to get back in them, and we're going to go eat. So we unloaded all the cars. We got in the cars to drive, to go to a restaurant, and we're using the GPS because we don't really know where we're going at the beach. And about 15 minutes into this 45-minute trip, the person in the passenger seat, who will remain nameless to protect me, they say, why is GPS taking us this way? Why are we going this way? If we go this way, it's just going to take us into the traffic, into the congestion. We don't want to sit in all of that. Yeah, just take a ride up here. So we take a right, and the person in the passenger seats, every few streets is like, turn here. No, don't turn there. I don't know what I'm thinking. turn here. No, don't turn there. And about 3 times of us turning our turn signal on like we're about to turn, and then we never turn. And then about 2 times of us slowing down to turn, we never turn. We pull off. At some point, you got to admit that you don't know where you're going, or else you're just going to keep going where you don't know where you're going. You're going to end up somewhere. It's not going to be where you want to end up. But we had to pull off. And so we had family in another car behind us, and they just keep going. And so the person in the passenger seat, just follow them. Just follow them. They seem to know where they're going. Just follow them. And so we followed them, and this 45-minute trip turned into an hour and a half. And I told you earlier, I like food, right? I like to eat. Grayson was just praying that we got to a restaurant. At this point, it didn't matter what restaurant. Any restaurant will do. And we got out of the car. I almost bowed to God right there, praised him for allowing me to get to a restaurant to eat. I didn't have to worry about, starving in the back of a car anymore. But it seemed so simple to me. In the back of the car, I was like, just follow the GPS. And look, I understand you can't always blindly follow a GPS. I understand that. But if you don't know where you're going anyway, what harm is it going to do to you, really? I don't really have the time to sit there with 20 minutes and a map and figure out the route that I'm going to take. And even then, I'm probably going to miss a street, and then I'm going to get more lost, And so I was like, just point A to point B. That's what the GPS is for. Just point A to point B. God told Moses exactly how to get from point A to point B. He said, you're at a place with no water. You want to go to a place with water, follow my directions, Moses. Follow me. Do what I'm telling you to do. And Moses, somewhere along the journey, somewhere along the line, says, why are we going this way, God? Why are you taking us this way, God? If I go this way, God, then I don't get to yell at the people. I don't get to let my frustrations out and scream at them. I don't get to say what I want to say in this, Lord. He says, if we go that way, God, I don't get to strike this rock. Which, by the way, Moses is angry at this point. He's frustrated. I get that. He strikes the rock not once, because once isn't enough for Moses. He has to strike the rock twice, because we all know if you hit something a second time, all of your anger is gone at that point, right? It's not how it works. Just so you know. In case you're going to try it after this, it's not going to work. But Moses is like, I'm not going this way. I don't get any credit in this way, God. I don't get any glory in this way, God. So Moses, he stepped out from the direction that God had given him. He says, I'm going to do this my way, God. I'm going to do this by my authority, God. I'm not submitting to your authority in this. I'm going to do it my way. And see, when that happens, you're relying on your own power to do it now. You're relying on your own power to get things done, to go your own direction. And as you can see from Moses, when you're relying on your own power in the troubles of this world, you're going to fall flat on your face. Moses, he had mourning, he had grieving, he was hurt, he had stresses, he had burdens, but with God, he was handling all that. When he stepped out on his own path, in his own way, he stopped being able to handle it, and the frustrations, they overwhelmed him, they overtook him, and he sinned. He lost sight of who his authority was. See, we rely on God because he is the source of power. He is energy. He is creator. We have a verse, and it talks about God's power. Awesome is God from his sanctuary, the God of Israel. He is the one who gives power and strength to his people. Blessed be God. See, the burdens, the stresses of this world, you can't handle them on your own power. You can't. They're just going to weigh you down. But with God, he gives the power to handle them. He gives the power to deal with them. He is going to provide for you. When Moses stepped out on his own and went his own direction, he literally unplugged himself from the source of power. That's how we fall flat on our faces. That's how we mess up. The stresses of of whatever argument you might get into this week, whether it's with your friend or your spouse or your children, that's going to weigh on your heart. Whatever burdens are thrown your way by work, by extra responsibilities, that's going to weigh you down. Whatever grief and mourning that you're dealing with, that's going to weigh you down. But if you're not plugged into the source of power, you're going to fall flat on your face when you're dealing with it. Give those things to God, because He has the power to handle them, not us. So Moses messes up. He steps out on his own. But he's not the only one that messes up. Or he's not the only one that messes up, because the people mess up, right? Moses messes up. The people messes up. It seems like nobody's doing right in this passage. It seems like nobody can do anything right. But there's a third party here that we haven't talked about yet, we haven't focused on yet. If you notice, God still supplies the water. The people mess up. Moses messes up. They all turned from God. They all went their own way. They wanted to complain against God. They were ungrateful. They were calloused. And God says, I see that, but I'm still going to give you water. See, the people, they were thirsting to death. God did not bring them out of Egypt to die, contrary to what the people thought. God did not bring them this far to let them die. He was going to provide for them. He was going to give them water. Life to them at this moment was water. Everybody was unfaithful to God, but He still provided. And this whole concept of everybody being against God, everybody being ungrateful and unfaithful to God, it reminded me of this passage in the New Testament. Romans 5:8, but God shows His love for us, and that while we were still sinners, while you were against God, while you were a sinner, while you were unfaithful to God, while you despised God, while you mocked Him, while you spit on Him, Christ died for us. God saw that you were a sinner, saw that mankind could not work their way to Him. He saw that no amount of good works outweighed the sin that they had. They were unfaithful. They were ungrateful. He saw that. He said, I'm still going to provide for you. I'm still going to give you life, and life abundant, eternal life. I'm going to give you my Son. I will provide for you. I think it's real interesting throughout the Bible that God is often compared to a rock because of His steadfastness. I think even more interestingly, water symbolizes life throughout the Bible. So when Moses strikes this rock wrongfully, it paints a picture for us of Jesus being struck wrongfully. He took that pain, He took that payment, took that burden for us. And water that flowed out of the rock, life flowed out of Jesus' death, out of that punishment. It's an amazing picture of the New Testament, of Christ's death. So look, I don't know what burdens you're carrying today. I don't know what grief you're dealing with, what you were mourning right now. I don't know what fights you got into before you came into church, what fights you're going to get into after church. I don't know any of that. But I know that we should stay plugged into the source of power, because He's going to help us through it. He's going to provide. Even when we're unfaithful, even when we mess up, He provides. So let's pray.